Now, time for us to turn our attention back to Gaelic football. I'm delighted to say Anthony Moyles is with us. Anthony, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, Ger. How you doing?
It looks like, from what we're seeing, that it would be a bit of a shock at this point if Meath did have a new manager next season. It looks like Andy McEntee only needs to get 40% support from the clubs, and we're told, I don't know if anybody's actually canvassed the clubs, that he should be able to get that support, which doesn't speak very well about the whole process and the whole scenario here. So all's not well, it seems, anyway, Anthony.
Yeah, it feels like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back a bit, Ger, over the last couple of weeks, because it's fair to say the county was on a bit of a high, I suppose, post the minors and the kind of the finishing off of the championships. Obviously the ladies' success was massive for the county, and there was a really massive feel-good factor around the county. I was in there that day. I think I spoke to you lads about it. It's, the outpouring of emotion in Croke Park that day by Meath fans of all gender, all age, all shape, all sizes was unbelievable. It just shows you how starved of success and the desire that's there. So I suppose when the county was feeling good, people outside the county, lots of people were saying to me, Jesus, football at Meath football's on the up, and it didn't come of any surprise, because there's been a massive amount of work, obviously, that's been going on in the last kind of even 10 or 12 years behind the scenes in all codes, especially the underage codes, to start generating that success. But we end up finding ourselves then getting a hammer blow like last week, and it's not necessarily a hammer blow just personally for Andy. It is, of course, and his management team, but it's, it wouldn't matter if it was you, Ger, or if it was myself, or if it was someone else who was in the same position. The issues still arise, and there are numerous issues, with why we find ourselves in this situation with a management team essentially in the middle of October.
I didn't realise that even when you're in the middle of a supposed contract, and I know there's no contract, because obviously there's no contract really worth the written thing that is actually written down, because obviously this is an amateur organisation and we understand that, but to have the vote at this point would suggest that the County Board executive and the senior inter-county team aren't aligned, and that just means that you're not going in the right direction. Somewhere along the way the relationship is broken down to a point where not everybody is aligned in the same way. And I looking at all the managerial situations around the country, it's evident that whatever process the GAA executives around the country use to pick their managers isn't really fit for purpose.
Well, you've a number of, I think, apart from the very obvious thing, right, of how long it has taken, right? Meath were knocked out of the championship in July. It's now nearly the middle of October. Even if, if Andy doesn't win the vote on his management team tonight, so an incumbent comes in. So this person comes in, has to basically meet the players, get backroom team sorted, because I don't think there's a plan B, by the way. I think this was just throw the cards up in the air and let's see how they fall. We'll come back to that in a minute, but this person probably wouldn't get their ducks in a row until the middle of October, maybe the start of December. So you're not that far away from the start of the campaign. I haven't heard any dissenting voices from the players. I haven't heard anyone coming out. I didn't hear anything in the last few months to say that there was a movement against Andy and the team. I think people were quite happy with how things finished up, and I think the feeling was that Andy would and the management team would go again for another year at least. So the time to probably look at this was when a review would have happened to the management team, probably 2 to 3, 4 weeks after they were knocked out of the championship. That was the time to raise all of these concerns, and then that was the time to probably throw the feelers out there to say, well, actually maybe there's another option. People can be disappointed with a management team. That's absolutely no problem, and I'm sure Andy will be grateful enough that if it does happen tonight and there's a vote against him, that he will step down, and the sun will rise tomorrow and there'll be a new management team in, and fair enough. But the way it's being done, Ger, is for me, the way it's happened essentially in this time, and the way it's just being thrown back to the clubs again is bad form. So you'd have to ask yourself, the vote was 8-7. So what exactly do the 7 people, what's the issue? You know, is the issue performance? Is the issue that they feel that the team has stagnated? Is the issue that they feel that there should be a new management team? Or is it personal? Like, is there some kind of a vendetta going on in the background?
Well, we don't know that. So, you know, again, that would be speculation. And in fairness, like, it was so close. It was on a knife edge. This wouldn't be, if one person had changed their mind, we'd never heard about this, it seems. Yeah. So look, I don't know. Maybe it's just opening the public's eye generally to what goes on. And one of the things that we kind of underrate is the stakeholder management, is the way that the business speak world would talk about it. But like, you just think about what Andy McEntee's season is going to be like next year, where he's going to the county board saying, I need this money for this, and I need this money for this, and I need this money for this, and he's looking around the room and he's going, who here voted for me? Who didn't vote for me? It's a very tricky situation for him either way now, isn't it?
It is a very, because, like, you know, as a CEO of any organisation, you want the board of directors to be behind you. Now, sometimes, like in the old Premiership parlance, you don't want them to be behind you too much. Generally, when they're supporting you, you're gone the next day. But it's like this, the whole succession idea is very, very strong and is required now. I would always feel, you know, that they have someone in place, that Andy would have someone, be it that they're on his backroom team, or that they're in the background waiting to take, they know the players, and that there's a relatively easy, you know, just a maneuver that they just come back in, they transition into the spot of the senior management. So that's one. But the second thing, as you quite rightly say, is where's the trust now? You know, so the trust between both the management, Andy himself, the manager, the management team, and also the players. You know, if the players are backing of Andy in the majority, like, where do they find, where's their trust level with the 7 individuals or more potentially that are knocking around the executive and the different cohorts of the executive down in Navan? So, like, I mean, are they going in there thinking, this is great, it's all tickety-boo, we're all moving in the right direction, we all want the one thing? Well, certainly not. So, you know, like, I mean, Mike, like, what if Andy wins tonight? What if the clubs do vote him in? Like, what do those 7 people who are on the executive do? Do they remain in their positions? Like, do they just say, oh, well, that's fine. Well, we threw the cat out of the bag for a little bit, but we're just going to stay here. Because obviously you would imagine tensions are going to be, and relationships are going to be fraught there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, you know, because it's look, the democratic process is can be often great, but it can be often absolutely very, very odd as well. And it just seems that this has come completely out of left field. I think everyone just expected that he'd be ratified, that he'd be getting ready for a new year, and it just throws the whole thing into disarray.
In Colm Keys' piece in the Irish Independent today, Anthony, he talks about new underage structures being outlined in recent weeks and a new under-20 management pathway being mentioned / developed. I'm not sure where that is. What's your information on that, and how positive a move that is for Meath?
Yeah, well, again, there's a couple of individuals who've been involved, John McCarthy and Cathal Brick, who've been involved in the minors and the under-20s in the last few years. Guys have been very successful with their teams, and it's good to see that there is a pathway. This is something that, you know, I would have coffee with you guys last year, where we were saying that the difference between the 17 and the 20-year-olds, that in Meath, you know, a lot of other counties were managing to keep these teams, and they were managing to keep a kind of a player kind of transition kind of period where they were going on to academy teams and different teams, and they were staying together basically, and they were building those guys. They were bringing other fellas in who may have missed out at 17. Some fellas mightn't be developed, some fellas mightn't have been taking it serious enough, or whatever it was, but they were bringing players in and out, and they were trying to keep the funnel as wide as possible all the way up to under 20. I don't think it's any, you know, big surprise to anyone that Dublin are focusing over the last number of years on under 20. They see under 20 being the much more, I suppose, the barometer of if you can become a senior inter-county footballer is your ability in under 20, rather than at 17 or minor level, because you're physically developing. You know, you're mentally probably more attuned with it and ready for the battle of going into a senior panel. So the focus is a lot more there. And I think what was happening certainly in Meath was players were just being kind of thrown back to the wind, back out to their clubs. Some had very good clubs with very good setups, some not so good, and their development was dipping. So where if they were in a race and if they were neck and neck with Dublin or the other good teams, what happened by the time 20 came along was they were taking a step back. So it was important that I suppose that pathway, to use a term that's been thrown around a lot, it was important that pathway was formalised. And that it's been looked at, and that's all positive, Owen. You know, that's all very, very positive that's happening in the county. But I suppose then you have the top situation where you would feel, well, let's get that right and let's tick the boxes there at the very, very top, and let's make sure that everyone is, again, as I said, we have a symbiotic relationship there. Everyone is feeling good about themselves. Everyone is focusing on moving on, and everyone is moving into one direction. You're always going to get animosity. You're always going to get a little bit of people who disagree. But you know what? Disagree within your four walls. Go in, leave blood on the wall if you want, but disagree, but then leave unified. That's the way it should be. And this stuff that's going on, and again happening out in the public domain, isn't what you need for a county setup. The
one caveat to that is that if he does come through, like, our information is the players are largely in favour of him staying, and that they feel that there's significant progress being made. The one caveat is that you do start the season with a chip on your shoulder collectively. You've got a shared unified purpose, and while it may feel like the enemy is within, you can definitely, he's a charismatic enough kind of figure who should be able to turn this into an us versus the rest of the world scenario, and that can be a powerful thing, particularly in a sport like Gaelic football where you need to be physically at it from the get-go.
Yeah, well, GAA loves a purpose, and GA players love a purpose. So yeah, I suppose it could be used, Ger, but at the same time there's probably nuances there that wouldn't be seen necessarily on the field. So you touched on it with regard to fundraising, with regard to funding, with regard to accessibility, maybe to resources that, I'm sure it won't be Andy, but part of his backroom team and some of the people who will be around him, who will be involved in the whole funding of the team and the fundraising of the team, and you can imagine some of the relationships there where there's a lot of, when training is finished, on a Wednesday night or a Friday night, they're meeting to ask for certain things to get the green light. And that's where I could see tension. And that's where, it won't be visible to the general fan on, when they go in on a Saturday or a Sunday to watch Meath, but it could very easily come out in the performances, because certain amount of teams may get whatever it is, and Andy and his management team may be deprived of it because, as I said, there may be still fraught relationships there.
All right, let's move on to the other thing that we wanted to talk to you about, and this is the potential for a revolution in the football championship, which would give every single county meaningful games in summertime with access to their best players. That's on the table. The alternative is, we're hearing, and John Fogarty's in the Examiner today to give the credit to this, is that one of the potential outcomes will be, it'll be status quo for this season, which means going back to the qualifiers, and that the next solution that we're going to be talking about will be round robins within the provinces. So that's what the future might hold for us. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think you just answered your own question, to be honest, because I tried to leave this stuff behind me when the CPA finished, because it makes blood come out of my ears and my eyeballs. I've been doing, but you guys have been doing an unbelievable job on it, because I think a lot of people were very quiet on it. It actually amazed me how little was coming out of Croke Park. And when I started to join all the dots, Ger, the answer I got was one of the reasons why the CPA left the fixtures committee, which was they felt that it was just a Trojan horse to kind of basically get the status quo back in. And I think it is. Plan A is that's not going to see the light of day. Plan B, and the funny thing is there's no vote for the status quo. So you either have Plan B, and if that doesn't get to 60%, boom, gone, you're back to the status quo. So I think John is right. I think it's going to be status quo for the next year. And I think then there's a review of the whole GAA championship. And I think I listened to, is it Brian McAvoy last week, who was on with yourselves. And it was funny, there was a lot in that interview. It was a great interview, and fair play to him coming on and arguing the other side of it. But I think if you listen to it, you can actually pick out those little things that I think he let some of the truths out. So in other words, he said, couple of things he said was, well, we'll let it all go back maybe after this to the CCC and let them come up with some ideas. I think that's where you're going, right? So the fixtures committee will probably it'll be like, thanks very much, lads, for your recommendations. But, they didn't win. Sorry, we did try, but it just didn't happen. So we're going back to the CCC, who have always been there. And what we're actually going to do is, and McAvoy also hinted at this, where he said, well, we're going to do round robins. Remember, he said like 5 and 4 and Ulster, this and this.
Yeah, they've thought about it, yeah.
Yeah, so I think essentially that's the reason why. If you remember Duffy went around the country, and we were heavily involved in the CPA at that time, and he went around the country on the Super 8, literally visited every single county. Promises were made, maybe assurances were given, whatever it was, but he basically won over pretty much nearly every county to get the Super 8. And the Super 8 was a big change, it really was, because change doesn't happen that often. The split season, I suppose, so where the CPA have felt that the job is done for them with regard to their mandate, the split season, it only took a global pandemic to get that in, and let's be honest, those things hopefully don't come around every couple of years. So let's hope it doesn't take another global pandemic to get the championship sorted out.
It's really, really interesting what you said there at the start, Anthony, your theory for why we might be left with the status quo. You think this is a Trojan horse for the status quo? Because my theory might have been that this would be a Trojan horse for a different format altogether. Maybe next year that this just misses out by a couple of percent, and then the next thing just stumbles over the line with a bit more of a focus from Croke Park. And it's interesting what you say, because maybe we're overlooking the new setup for the GAA strategic plan over the next 5 years. The committee that Pat Gilroy is heading up. Even just kind of looking through that, Larry McCarthy and Tom Ryan are both going to sit on this committee, and you'd wonder if they have a different plan, or if the strategic committee's work is going to involve potentially a different plan for how the football championship will operate over the next little while.
Well, you'd hope so, Owen. You'd hope so. You've got some forward-thinking individuals there, and I think, look, maybe I'm being a bit cynical about this, but I think the last year and a half has taught a lot of people a lot of things in that. The old paradigm and what everyone was used to has been thrown out the window. It's not that it's a new normal, but I hate that phrase, but it's a situation where people realize that actually things can be done differently. Okay, you don't have to stay, on the middle line. You can go a little bit left and right, and if the will is there, well, then it can be done. And that has been done. Things have been ripped up and thrown out, and things have been turned on their head, and new formats have been revised and developed up pretty much nearly overnight. So it can be done. You cannot come back into any room and say, oh, well, it can't be done. Logistically, it can't be done. It can be done. So so that has already been set. The next thing now is to try to develop a format, which is difficult. And everyone has to understand that it is difficult, but it has to tick the certain things that everyone wants. And the first people who should be looked after, essentially, are the players. So the players should be. The GPA is getting a lot of kudos, and quite rightly, but I still feel, I went to Congress for my sins, and I sat there and I saw how the GPA were treated on the night, no more than the CPA. And if I was a member of the GPA once, and if I had seen then, what I saw on that night, I'd be kind of going, why am I a member of this, really? Because they were essentially just, left out in the waiting room. They weren't really part of the situation. I would hope that it has developed since, and I hope that it will continue to develop, because at the end of the day, the game lives and dies on the demand and on the pleasure and on the want and the desire of the players to play the game. And that is it. The quality, the requirements, all the dedication, everything that is increasing every year. And these guys will step away if there is not a meaningful situation to play. And then, they'll go back to their club and they'll say, I'm not playing county.
That might actually be what people want, though. There's this kind of weird tension within the organisation where they want the big games and the big crowds in at the end of the year, but the rest of the year they don't really want to hear from the players, and they don't really want to hear about the sacrifices or any of that kind of stuff. It's like, no, hang on a second. You're club players, and we want you playing for the clubs. It's a definite tension, because I'm looking at the makeup of the strategic committee, and the GPA don't get a mention. the makeup of the strategic plan steering group: Larry McCarthy, Tom Ryan, Rory Harvey, Conor McCarthy, Dr. Eilish Kelly, Pat Gilroy, Paul Foley, Professor David Hassan, Shane Flanagan and Tim Murphy. I don't know, was David Hassan connected? I don't know. I don't think so, but
it's like it feels that there are two different groups almost. Like the other strategic committee, the fixtures task force
is done. It's finished.
Yeah,
it's finished
so that's being wound up, and all of a sudden then you have a different steering group that exists that includes arguably the two most powerful men in the GAA, the two men that we're wondering why aren't we hearing from. That I wonder is there other plans afoot that we don't know about? But then it kind of calls into question a couple of things. Like, for example, Anthony, I know this is maybe like a slight bit off topic, but have you heard one convincing argument against Proposal B in the debate over the last little while?
Not really, Owen. I haven't, but at the same time, I feel that I just feel that it's in there, and it's a kind of a thing whereby they're testing the water with it, right? So they're kind of saying to themselves, well, listen, we'll test the water with this. It's probably not that far from it. It is radical enough. So we'll see if there's any real demand for it. So if it gets maybe 20% or 25% or something like this, that I think would be a big win for it. Even 30% would be a massive win for it. So I like quite often the GAA, they throw out the flag, the flare goes up. The flare is just to draw your attention to it, to say, oh, okay, what's going on here? It's to start the debate in a very, very even, kind of a pretty low level type of matter. But then the real debate happens post that. So, another year. So from now on. So I honestly feel that that'll be done. The status quo will come in. But the real activity with regard to change will happen over the next year. You would really hope that that steering committee can and has the bravery and has the backing, because to get some significant change in. Because I think you said it, Ger, on one of the things. Like my reading of Congress was, whatever is said at the top table, whatever is pretty much seconded and pushed on at the top table, just wins hands down. There's very, very little that ends up winning on the floor. It's if the top boys are saying it and they're pushing it, you're pretty much there. So that's what generally has to happen. And I think that's for something like that. And the CCC are doffing their cap to a number of people. The Ulster Council. There's a lot of I suppose desire to keep situations as they are, because some obviously provinces would feel, well, listen, there's nothing wrong with our championship. We're making lots of money out of it. We're doing very well. The games are pretty competitive. So they feel that their little kind of province is where it's at, without really casting an eye on the game as a whole and on the actual future of Gaelic football as a whole, and on I suppose on the ramifications of the championship for fellas in different counties who only get to play really 2 meaningful matches a year in the championship. So there's a lot of things. I think bravery has to come into it. Of course, it's going to be lopsided. There's still going to be the best strong counties, but you just want to bring in fairness, and you want in fellas that they want to actually play and try to get as many games as possible and try to enjoy it as much as possible and try to have something to go for. Because I don't believe this stuff of if you can't win Sam Maguire, you can't win anything. That's absolute BS. You need to have something to aspire to. You need to have something to try to go for, and all of the things that with the Tailteann Cup and the different things, that's all positive. So I think essentially what you're going to look at is, I'd be amazed if Plan B wins. I'd be more amazed if Plan A wins, but I'd be amazed if Plan B wins. So I think the status quo, and then I think the real work will need to start.
And that work, it's kind of like the present thought that that work would be benefited so much by having a look at one of these proposals in action, especially Proposal B. This steering group,
that's the thing,
would be so much better for the experience of working in an organisation that had Proposal B even in on a 1-year term.
This didn't work for these reasons, so we're tweaking it, and we now know that. So we've had the 20 years of the qualifiers, we had the 2 years of the Super 8s, we've had 2 years of this, and now we have all that information and we're spitting this into a computer, and out comes this fixture list that works for everybody.
Sorry. No, the biggest thing, Ger, is one of the things a lot of this comes down to the old the finances at the end of the day, right? So a lot of it comes down to that. The GAA is bleeding now for the last year and a half. So they went from a situation where they were absolutely, one of their best years financially to having a nightmare situation. So they're now looking and going, right, how do we get revenue? How do we get ourselves back to that line that we were on, where we were growing incrementally every year? We took a big dip. So if you're a business, which they are, they're going to go back to probably what they know best. They're probably going to go back to, listen, we had a system there. It was making plenty of money for us. We had it down. There was naysayers, but you know what? It was successful. So I would imagine that there's going to be a big push for that. To do something so radical after suffering a pretty significant loss for a period of time is going to take an awful lot of commitment, and it's very brave. So when you flip it and you actually think, well, hold on a second, if we did a year of this and we actually trialed it, and we had a look at, well, actually, could we get the crowds in for those matches in the spring? Could we get some really, really big games that we might get 7 or 8 or 9,000 at a league match, but could we get 20, 25, 30,000 at some of these games in the spring in the provincial championships? And then we could get some absolute crackers all the way through the league format. This would be a time to do it, because it essentially could provide them where they look at the bottom line at the end of the year and say, geez, this revenue it far exceeds the best year we've ever had. And now we have the financial backing of a system. Never mind even the anecdotal stuff with regard to player welfare and games and and enjoyment and entertainment for the public. But that, lads, is going to take an enormous leap of faith, and I just can't see it happening this year.
I think, unfortunately, you're right, and I think that this is death by committee. That's what's going to happen here, and the next strategic review committee will come out with their plans. And I really wish that we still had Eugene McGee here, because I'm sure he'd be able to dust down reports from the 60s and the 80s, and we'd be like, oh, look, this idea isn't new. This is exactly the same idea that we had a long time ago. And so, look, this is it, though, for us. I can't countenance talking about structures ever again after this. If this doesn't go through, that would be it.
I'm already broken.
I'll hold you to that, Ger.
Well, if anybody ever hears me, turn it off. Turn me off. Turn the whole thing off. Anthony, good stuff. Thanks a million.
All right.
Cheers,
lad.
Anthony Moyles giving us some thoughts there on the situation at hand. It's right there. This is right there. And even if it is only for a trial basis, we're gonna crunch the figures, and we're gonna come back with maths that we think suggests that it's actually a no-brainer from a mathematical financial perspective as well. But for me, the big thing is that those weaker counties can't keep their best players playing. They can't convince them to commit. Why would I commit to this? And that's the majority of counties. Most of the counties don't have a realistic opportunity to win any silverware. And what we're saying now is that there'll be meaningful opportunities to have a full season where you progress and you get access to the same strength and conditioning, and you'll play in front of your home crowd, and it will matter in good weather, and you have the same training calendar as everybody else.
You are allowed to participate. That's what happens to the weaker counties. You are allowed to participate in the summer months. Peak time of the GAA calendar is also for you, not just for the few.